wait on that. All right. So the reason why I actually asked Debbie to go back and read that one little sentence, it says, and the word of Samuel came to all of Israel. That's verse 1 of chapter 4. This is one of those cases where I think it's a bad cutoff. I think that goes with the one previous to it, because Samuel is instituted as a prophet there. He begins, and when he begins and he's known as a true prophet, and the word of Samuel came to all of Israel, it sort of goes with that. And then the Ark of the Covenant is captured. If you're not careful, I saw some commentaries where it says, and the word of Samuel came to all of Israel. Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines, and what they said was, obviously Samuel is telling them when to go in and out of battle by putting those two things together. And that is not true. That's not at all how that happened, but it's what happens when you don't have a good cutoff. So why it was cut off there, I'm not really sure. Remember that verses and chapters and cutoffs and all of that were done long ago, and we've already, just in our study, seen it happen several times where we kind of go, wow, that's a bad cutoff. This is one of those situations where that first sentence should have actually gone with chapter 3. Then we're going to begin with the next one, the Ark of God. The Ark of God captured. Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines and encamped beside Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped in Aphek. All right, so Israel is going to go out into battle. We talked in our introductory about the fact that this is a time when Israel doesn't have a lot of really big, bad enemies in their life. Egypt is not really a bad enemy in their life. They have some Moabite, Ammonite issues, but they're sort of on the same level with the Moabite, Ammonites. It's just sort of tribal fighting, going on about land, and we're going to see some of that as we continue on in this book. But the one enemy that Israel is going to have that is going to rear its ugly head and cause a lot of trouble for them throughout many of our chapters are the Philistines. And so we need to know just a little bit about the Philistines. In your packet for this week, I gave you one page. It says, coincidentally, the Philistines. And there's a little map up at the top. In this map, you can see that the Philistines came from the Aegean Seas, most likely around the area of Crete. They came into Israel two different times. They actually came in around 2000 BC. They came in, and then they came in around 1200 BC, which would have been the secondary time that we're talking about. There was some Philistines around during the time of Abraham. The issue with the Philistines, and we talked about it in our introduction, is the fact that they were able to smelt iron. And so their weaponry was very strong, and much more so than any of the other tribes, much more so than the Israelites, who had to use more wooden and arrows and those type of things. The Philistines could make armor, and they could make shields, and they could make weaponry that was much stronger. So they were considerable foes for the Israelites, and they created the problem. You can read some information about this during this week if you want to see what's in the name. It's interesting to me that they are mentioned 150 times in the book of Samuel, the Philistines, so they're going to be really important. It says here, they were so entrenched and dominant in the coastal areas and the foothills of Canaan, eventually they gave their name to the entire land. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, about the Philistines, about Palestine, about how the connection is there. But here's the thing that you need to know for right now. The Philistines were not Arab people. They were not even Semitic people. They were coastal people from Greek. They had more tie-in with Greek than they did with the Arabs. And so the confusion that some people have with Palestine and Philistines is because the names are so familiar, and because they're enemies, they tend to want to tie them all together. That's not true. The Palestinians that are creating the issues of today do not come from Philistine stock. These guys were more from the Greek end. The Palestinians of today are Arabs, Semitic people. It's a different group. The confusion lies because Palestine and where the Philistines' land is overlapped. Many of the same cities that the Philistines had control of are lands today that the Palestinians have control of. Okay, so we'll go over it. Don't be confused if that's the first time you heard it. I just want you to understand there is confusion out there. The Palestinians and the Philistines are the same people. That is just not true. But there is information on here that's interesting, and we are going to get to know a little bit about them. So the Philistines put themselves in battle array against Israel, and when they joined battle, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men of the army in the field. So in this chapter, we're going to hear about two battles that are going to occur. It's an ongoing thing. We're going to read about them over and over. Well, if they're mentioned 150 times, you know we're going to read about them over and over. But in this chapter, there are going to be two battles. It's interesting that when you read in the Hebrew and they talk about the leaders of the Philistines, they're always called Seren, S-E-R-E-N, not Melech, which is kings of other nations. Melech is the Hebrew term, M-E-L-E-C-H, is Hebrew for the king. And it's used oftentimes in the writings when they talk about the kings of nations, Melech. But when you are talking about the Philistines, they're called Seren, S-E-R-E-N. It's a whole different name. Now, follow me with this. If you take it over into the Greek, it's called Tyrannus. The same word, Seren, is called Tyrannus. And in the English, the same word is tyrants. So it's just interesting to me that they used a completely separate name for king for the Philistines, which in our English is tyrants. Tells you they were a fierce and fearsome people, even back in that time. So when the people had come into let me just do a little explanation. So they fight, and Israel is defeated by the Philistines, and they kill 4,000 people in the field. That's quite a defeat, 4,000. That's a lot of bodies that are going to have to be buried, but that's nothing compared to what's coming up. So when it says Israel was defeated by the Philistines, the word then they're going to retreat out of there. When they're defeated, they're going to have to retreat out of there. And when the people had come into camp, so see, they've retreated off of the battlefield and they've gone back into camp. Where was the camp? Go back to the previous part before it says they encamped beside Ebenezer. All right? Now, we talked about this before. There's that song where it talks about Ebenezer. I included it in your packet this week. Come thou fount of every blessing. And it says, here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come. That song that goes with that, most people have no idea what they're singing there. Just means a stone of help. That's exactly what Ebenezer means. It's not it wasn't intended at first to be a name. It means stone of help, but that's what the area there was named. The interesting thing is that we're not going to see it named until chapter 7. Okay? So this is talking about it in chapter 4, named Ebenezer, but it's not actually named until chapter 7. Keep in mind, these things are not written as they're occurring. They're further down the line. Someone is going back and talking about the name that was given to it in chapter 7. And he's going to give that name Ebenezer there for a very specific reason, because God was a help and he has a rock of help. But it's called Ebenezer at that point. So the Israelites are in, I lost my page. There we go. The Israelites are in Ebenezer and the Philistines are in Aphek. Ebenezer is hill country to where you can see. Aphek is plain country. If you look on your map, here that I gave to you, you'll be able to see that I actually put stars next to it so that you can get a little bit idea of the distance there. Look on in your packet. There's a star up at the top. Eleazar, there's a Aphek, and then there's Shiloh. These are the towns that we're talking about in this chapter. Shiloh is where the Ark of the Covenant is held, the tabernacle is. Eleazar is where the Israelites are encamped so that they can go into battle, and Aphek is where the Philistines are encamped, where they can go into battle. From Shiloh to Eleazar is roughly about a 20-mile distance, just so that you can kind of get a little bit of information on that. So they go back to the camp after the 4,000 people have been killed, and it says, and when the people had come into the camp, the elders of Israel said, why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? And so what are they recognizing?
That the Lord's not with them.
Okay, so this is the Lord's doing. They at least have the spiritual discernment to recognize that when they succeed in battle, when they are victorious, it is the Lord's victory. When they are defeated in battle, the Lord has defeated them. Now the Philistines are what he's using, but it's the defeat of the Lord. We saw that with Nebuchadnezzar. That was God's judgment on Israel. You know, he used Nebuchadnezzar, he used the Babylonians to do that, but it was his defeat against Israel, and he mentions that over and over. So they said, why has the Lord defeated us before the Philistines? Let us bring the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord from Shiloh to us, and that when it comes among us, it may save us from the hands of our enemies. So this is their idea. Let's go get the Ark of the Covenant. We'll bring it into battle, and then God will have to help us.
It'll be our rabbit's foot.
It's a good luck charm. God will have to help us because he's going to be here. He is going to be with us. So, before we go any further, let's just stop for a second. As ridiculous as that sounds, it's not that ridiculous because they've done it before. All right? The Ark of the Covenant has gone into battle. It went into battle when they, in Joshua, when they're out in the wilderness wanderings. It goes into battle in Jericho. They take the Ark of the Covenant and use it there. But God instructs them to be doing that. And it's while they're in the wandering periods where they don't have an established area, where everything is transient and they're mobile, that they use that. So before you judge them too harshly, remember that in their history it has been done, to where the Ark of the Covenant has been used so that the presence of the Lord had a stronger impact on what it was. In this case, God doesn't tell them to do any of that. They just think it up.
They don't even ask.
They don't ask. Well, who are they going to ask? I mean, you know, they have the priesthood. Remember what's going on back there. They're busy doing their little things. And so they don't have anybody. So this is this is their idea. And when it comes among us, it will save us from the hands of our enemies. So obviously, from just this statement, we see the spiritual discernment of Israel is at an all-time low because they are saying, where is the power coming from? Where's it coming from? In their eyes here. The ark. Where is the power actually coming from?
God.
The Lord, right? But they've got that really messed up. I thought about that song that's out on K-Love all the time where it says, let me want the healer more than the healing. You know, let me want the miracle maker more than the miracles. It's that whole idea of we want the blessing, we want the miracle, we want all of that, and that's good, and there's nothing wrong with wanting that. But when you want those things more than you want the one who provides those things, you've now ventured into dangerous territory. That's where Israel is. They've now said the power is in the ark. Let's bring it out here. Just having the power of the ark there is enough, without remembering that it's the Lord, and they've just said the Lord defeated them. So if they truly believe that the Lord's defeated them, this is kind of a little bit of a blackmail, really. It's like, we'll drag it out here, and then he has to protect us from the Philistines because he's part of it. So you can see where this went dreadfully wrong. Go to verse 4. So the people sent to Shiloh that they might bring from there the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. And when the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all of Israel shouted so loudly that the earth shook. All right, that's 4 and 5. And so the people send to Shiloh. They say, bring us the ark of the covenant. They even, the little notation here is the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. So I included a picture just to remind you the ark of the covenant. When we discussed it in Exodus, we discovered that it's about the size of my coffee table, just to give you a visual of what that is. It was to be carried only by the priest. We're going to read more about that as we go along in Samuel. It was only to be carried by the priest, that there were the two angels that the wings enfold over the top of it, that it was the mercy seat. The word used is propitiation, the mercy seat, where God would come down and dwell among the cherubim. And then just a reminder from those of you who were in Exodus is what was inside of the Ark of the Covenant. There was tablets of the Ten Commandments. There was Moses' rod that blossomed. And there was a jar of manna inside the Ark of the Covenant. And so it was a critically important visual for Israel to have that there. And so the two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are with the ark. Is that surprising? Because why? They're priests. Bad priests, but priests nonetheless. And so if the ark is going to be carried, who's going to carry it? Hophni and Phinehas, more than likely. They're the head honchos. They're sons of the high priest. If the Ark of the Covenant is going to be carried, more than likely they're going to be part of all of that. And when the Ark of the Covenant came into the camp, so now we're back at Ebenezer, all right? So they've traveled that, say, roughly 20 miles, carrying the Ark, and they're now back at Ebenezer where the fighting is going to come all about. Israel shouted so loudly that the earth shook. That's a loud shout. So, why would they shout?
Victory is ours.
There you go. Confident of a victory, of a coming victory. I mean, they've put God in a no-win situation, right? He's there. Surely he's not going to let him fail now. Well, he's sitting right there. So they are confident now. They've covered all their bases and victory is theirs.
And shouted at Jericho.
They did shout at Jericho when the walls fell. And so, 6. Now when the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, what does the sound of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews mean? And then they understood that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp. All right, so now it's such a loud shout that you can see by your little map that you have that there's not a whole lot of difference between the two camps where the armies are. So there, it's close enough that they could hear the shouting, and they said, what's going on? That sounds pretty good, like they're pretty happy over there, and we just slaughtered 4,000 men. They should not be shouting for joy. And it says, and then they understood that the ark of the Lord. How would they understand that? How do you think one of the ways they would understand that? Spies. And every story that we read, there are people that are spying and looking. And so somebody from the Philistines is out there going, oh, the box is coming in, the Ark of the Covenant. They know enough about it to know that the Ark of the Lord had come into the camp. So the Philistines were afraid. Isn't that interesting? They're afraid when the Ark of the Covenant comes in. For they said, God has come into the camp. Now stop just a minute. Do they know God?
No.
If they're the tyrants that we just discussed, they don't know God for Jehovah God, for who he was, the Yahweh of the Hebrews. They don't know him in that sense. But do they know that the Hebrews have a God?
Yes.
Do they believe that he's powerful?
Yes.
They do. Remember when we were talking about the Egyptians and how it was that when God did the plagues and all the miraculous things that happened there, the Hebrews, many of them, believed it and accepted what was going on. Because it's very easy to add another God to the mix. That's not a hard thing to do. If you believe in gods, plural, and there's a God for everything, it's not that hard to take someone else's God and add it to the mix. But God said that's not ever to be what he wanted. He was to be the God, only the God. And so in this situation, the Philistines recognize that the Hebrews' God has come into the mix, but they don't know who he is. Yet they are still afraid. That's kind of an interesting thing. Very afraid, actually, because they said, God has come into the camp. So they're no different than the Hebrews. They believe that he lives in that box. God lives inside that little box with the golden angels over it that's about the size of my coffee table. God lives there. And so he's coming now in. Maybe they were afraid when they opened the box. What would happen? I don't know.
They may have also remembered the stories about what happened in Egypt.
Well, they do, because that's where we're going. They absolutely do. They said, God has come into the camp, and then they said, what did they say?
Woe to us.
Woe to us, for such a thing has never happened before. In other words, in any of their previous battles with Israel, this isn't their first, in any of their previous battles with Israel, the Ark of the Covenant had not come into it. This is going to be, they already know that this is bad for them. I think that's interesting, that they're afraid. That's keep that in the back of your mind. So now look at 8. Woe to us. Second time they said that. Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? In this case, it's the plural. These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness. Now, keep in mind that the Egypt story was 300 years roughly earlier. 300 years earlier than this time frame. So 300 years later, they're still talking about the God of the Egyptians, or the God who brought his people out of Egypt. That's pretty amazing. So there's oral stories, there are written stories, whatever, however it's being passed, they still remember. Do you remember when we were in Exodus, I told you this was a watershed moment for Israel, and it was. It was the changing moment. Even today, they still celebrate that when they do Passover. That God delivered them out of the hands of the Egyptians. But you know what? It was a watershed moment for the world. Throughout the Old Testament, we see different times when people recognize the power of the God of the Hebrews because of what happened in Egypt. And so they know that story. It didn't just stay in Israel being passed from father to son. The entirety of the world knew what had happened in Egypt. And so 300 years later, they're still talking about it.
And God always used that as a reference when he was talking to his people.
Absolutely.
I am the God that brought you out of Egypt. And
Good point.
Over and over and over
If you
again.
took that out of the Bible, the whole Bible would fall apart.
Exactly. He says, don't forget, if I could do that, I can do this. Mm-hmm. And I upheld you with my mighty right hand. And that's just over and over. That's exactly right. He brings that up over and over to remind them, if I could do that, I can do anything for you in preparation of what's coming. So they're pretty scared about all this. These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with all the plagues. They even remember all of those details in the wilderness. Be strong and conduct yourselves like men, you Philistines, that you do not become servants for the Hebrews as they have been to you. Well, they just defeated them, and they evidently had some victory over them in the past. So I find it really interesting that they're afraid. They say, "Woe unto us! These are the gods that have all of the power. Now stand up and be strong." I mean, you would think that maybe they would say, okay, let's rethink this. Let's go back to AFAC. Let's decide exactly how we want to handle this and what needs to be done. But they don't. These are a tyrant people. These are a ferocious people. These guys don't scare easily. And when they do scare, it appears that they become even more dangerous. So conduct yourselves like men, do not become servants. Conduct yourselves like men and fight. So it's almost out of that fear came a desperation of this is not going to be good, but we are going to fight to the death on this one. So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and every man fled to his tent. There was a very great slaughter, and there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. So how many were killed earlier in the first battle?
4,000.
That was bad. Now the Ark of the Covenant was with them, in the midst of it, and how many are killed?
30,000.
That's worse. So would you say the plan did not work? So the plan did not work. So let's look at it from the perspective of the Hebrews. What did they learn from this?
That they did the wrong thing.
That obviously God must not have been inside the box that day. Because he did not work well for them that day.
Maybe we should have asked.
Maybe we should have looked at this a different way, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what did the Philistines learn from this?
No, their gods are not so powerful.
Okay, so it's really a slam on God of the Hebrews, isn't it? And so oftentimes when the nations would go to battle, it was very common, very, very common that they would bring their idols into battle with them as their protectors. You know, it's still common today in many religions. I mean, you know, the St. Christophers that you wear for protection, and the different things that people use for protection. They would bring their idols in, and so whoever was defeated, the first thing you would do is you would take that idol, and you would take it back, because once you've defeated the people, you've defeated the God of those people. And so it becomes very important and very impressive. Remember when the Babylonians, in our little Ezekiel study, when the Babylonians go and destroy Jerusalem, what do? They take all of the items of the temple, all of the important holy items of the temple, and they take them back and they store them in their own idols, the places of their own, where they worship their own idols. They bring that, it's sort of a stamp. It's that Allah Akbar, our God is greater. It's that whole sort of philosophy of it's not good enough that we all both have gods, our God is greater. And so in this case, although God did, the Israelites knew better than to make, thou shalt not make unto me any graven images. They knew better than to make a statue of their God the way the nations did. What had the Ark of the Covenant become in their eyes? That same thing, right? That idol that they were never to have had, which is why God didn't want them to have graven images anyway. So to the Philistines, the Ark of the Covenant becomes what? Israel's idol, which goes against everything that God had intended for them to ever have. And so when they go into battle, and we're going to find out as we go in the next couple of chapters, they want Israel's idol, because that proves that their God is greater than Israel's God. And so I want you to look for just a minute at the position that Israel put Jehovah in Yahweh. Look at the position that they put him in. They put him in a position of being, of appearing to the outsider as if he had been defeated. Appearing to the outsiders as if he had been captured and taken hostage. So this becomes something that Israel is going to have to pay a price for. And so 30,000 foot soldiers of Israel are killed on that day, and it appears to both sides that God has been defeated. Also, the Ark of God was captured, and the sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. Okay, so it's just a little sentence in verse 11, but it's hugely important. It needs to be underlined, and the Ark of God was captured. It was taken. This is going to be, we're going to, for our next few chapters, talk about what's going to happen when the Ark was captured. And then there's just another side note. The sons of Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas died. Had that already been expected? Twice now we've already read that was going to happen. And so it isn't surprising. God said they will die on the same day. And so that's exactly, it was done exactly the way God had said. It was a fulfillment of prophecy.
Do you think it was their idea to go back and get the ark?
I think that they likely were not at the battlegrounds. They were likely in Shiloh. So when the camp sent word that they wanted the Ark of the Covenant, this is just me saying, I do see it very reasonable to believe that Hophni and Phinehas said, great idea. This is going to be really, we'll carry it. Let us stand in the front 2 places. Because, we're important and this is a great idea. So I am sure they were very supportive of that. What I'm less sure of is Eli's response. Whether Eli stood up and said, no, absolutely not, and was overruled, or whether or not he kept silent, but in his heart he trembled for the ark. We're going to read.
Stood up, though.
Whether he, how he responded. He didn't stand up to his sons, so you wonder, but for whatever reason, we're going to find that Eli, his heart trembled for the ark. He was afraid, which tells me he knew it was the wrong thing for them to do. And so, so they're going to die exactly as God had said. Now let's look at verse 12. Then a man of Benjamin ran from the battle line the same day, and he came to Shiloh with his clothes torn and dirt on his head. Remember, once again, this is 20 miles and it's mostly uphill to go into Shiloh. So he's doing some heavy duty running. His clothes are torn and dirt on his head is an interesting detail. What does that signify in Hebrew culture? Mourning.
Yeah.
Mourning. And so why would he be mourning? Because they loved, yeah. So 30,000 of his people were just killed. The Ark of the Covenant was just captured. There's a lot of stuff going on that he's in mourning for. And so he comes with those visible outward signs of mourning that would occur when he came in. Now when he came, there was Eli sitting on the seat by the wayside, watching. For his heart trembled for the Ark of God. Doesn't say anything about his sons there. Doesn't say his heart trembled for his sons. Do you think that at this point he had already accepted the fact that they were dead?
Probably, yeah.
Or if not today, then tomorrow.
They were gonna,
Exactly.
Yeah,
So if not today, then tomorrow, or the next day, or the next day. It was pretty much done, and Eli had accepted it when he said, "It's the Lord speaking. Let him do what is right, what is best." And he had accepted that. And so it doesn't say that his heart trembled for his sons. It says for the ark of God. And when the man came into the city and told it, all of the city cried out. So when this man comes in and talks about what? He's going to talk about all the things we just discussed. The whole city, now the earth is shaking again, but this time it's not a joyous victory. We win, we win. Now it's mourning for the loss. And when Eli heard the noise of the outcry, he said, what does the sound of this tumult mean? So he hears it, wants to know, and the man came quickly, and he told Eli. Now, Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were so dim that he could not see. And so we know by now he's blind, pretty much blind, can't see anything. Again, an interesting detail. Twice now he's told us that Eli's eyesight is bad. If you keep that in mind, that spiritual interpretation we had on Israel's blindness, darkness that they were falling into, at this point with the Ark of the Covenant being defeated, Eli would be totally blind, because that's where Israel was. And the man said to Eli, I am he who came from the battle, and I fled today from the battle line. And he said, what happened, my son? So the messenger answered and said, Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there's been a great slaughter among the people. Also your 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead. And he kind of leaves the worst for last. And the ark of God has been captured. So he knew it was coming. He knew that it was going to happen. Did he know about the Ark of the Covenant?
No.
That hadn't been prophesied. So this
he
is
didn't know that part.
that part of it is new to him.
Maybe that's why it was such a shock and he fell over.
Well, it is definitely, definitely something that shocks him. And then it happened, that when he made mention of the ark of God, not when he made mention of his two sons, not when he made mention that there's been a great defeat, Eli fell off the seat backward from the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died. For the man was old and heavy, and he had judged Israel 40 years. I think it's interesting that they say, and he had judged Israel 40 years. They tack that on there. It's almost like that should be a separate thing, but it's an important part of Eli's legacy, and so it needs to be there. So if his neck is broken and he dies,
I wonder why they mentioned that he was heavy.
because he was. Because when he fell, I guess that had something to do with why his neck broke, because he was a heavy,
Much harder.
that much harder
Yeah.
from where it was. You know, I mean, it's a terrible way to go, but it's quick.
Mentioned before.
No, it hadn't been mentioned before, but
Makes you wonder about the meat again.
Yeah, I thought that.
or the fat, huh? The fat, eating of the fat. Yeah, yeah. So you know, it's a terrible way to die, but it's also a very quick way to die. And he is not going to be there to see some of the horrible things that had to happen. You know, with what's happening and what's going to happen. So what's interesting here, it's not specifically mentioned in this verse, but it's something important for us to know, is that after this defeat of the Hebrews, and after this happens, there's a couple of really important things that are going to happen in the history. One, right after this, Shiloh is going to be destroyed. Okay, we know that from the history books. We also know from, there's some scripture in Psalms, there's some scripture in Jeremiah that talks about it. Shiloh is going to be destroyed completely. So the Philistines are so, made so brave by this defeat that they come and destroy where the tabernacle was, where the ark was, where the priesthood was. All of those things that we're talking about, all of that is going to be destroyed. Also, it emboldens the Philistines to go forth, and they begin to capture more land. So their territory in Israel is going to become bigger. Another thing that's going to happen is that they are going to retain the right of some of the major highways, thoroughways, and so trade now will strongly rest in the side of the Philistines. What does that mean? Money. They are going to become more and more wealthy because they are going to retain control of the trade routes, whereas the Israelites, the Hebrews, are not going to have that, and so they don't receive the money from that. So, although we're not talking about it in this chapter, it's really important for us to remember that these are some important things that are going to happen. That primarily for us is the fact that right after this battle, Shiloh's going to be destroyed, and we're going to see a whole new way of living for the people there. All right. So it's kind of interesting that Eli dies, the ark is taken captive, and Shiloh is destroyed all about the same time. So this is the time now where Samuel is going to come into his power, into his ministry. He's going to be the last judge. There's not going to be any others that are alive at this time. Samson's gone, and Eli's now gone, and so Samuel is going to step into the power and authority. All right, so now we're going to talk about Ichabod. Now, his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child and due to be delivered. So this is Phinehas and Hophni. This is Phinehas' wife, Eli's daughter-in-law. And when she heard the news that the ark of God was captured, again, just trying to tell you and impress on you how disastrous this news is to everyone, that the ark has been captured, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed herself and gave birth, for her labor pains came upon her. So basically what they're saying here is the shock of hearing that the ark had been captured, the shock of hearing that her father-in-law fell and broke his neck, the shock of hearing that Phinehas had died, the 30,000 that had been slaughtered, all of that, she goes into labor. And it says that it was time for her to give birth, so it doesn't necessarily mean that it was like a premature birth, but it was her time, and she goes into labor. About the time of her death, so labor's not going well. About the time of her death, the woman who stood by her said to her, "Do not fear, for you've borne a son." So what is she trying to do by doing that? Maybe
Console her.
encourage her.
Yeah.
Maybe they think that they can keep her from dying, but it says, but she did not answer, nor did she regard it. So she has no joy. The normal response to giving birth to a son, particularly a son in those days, would be joy. She doesn't have any answer. So whether or not she willed herself to die, or whether it was physical, or whether it was both, it appears that it could very well have been both during that time. So she stays alive long enough to name the child Ichabod. This is the only time you hear the name in the Bible, Ichabod. And it actually literally means in Hebrew, no glory. That's what Ichabod means, no glory. And the reason why she names him no glory is because the glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God has been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. Now, what I think is really interesting is the word that's translated as departed here. If you go back to the Hebrew and read it, another translation, another definition of the word is exiled. It can mean exiled. And so what they're saying is that the Ark of the Covenant has been exiled from Israel at this point. Let's keep that in mind for a minute and finish this out. Then she said, the glory has, let me just put it my way, been exiled from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured, or the glory has departed because the ark has been captured. Now, why is that wrong? Read that
Well,
just a
because
minute.
again, the emphasis is on the ark,
Exactly.
not God.
Exactly. And so if God is being exiled into another land because of the Ark of the Covenant, what are some of the things that they're not understanding? Well, first of all, they're not understanding that God is omnipresent. He doesn't live in the box. It says that the Shekinah glory came between where the cherubim were, and so that Shekinah glory would come down there during the times of the atonement and different things like that. But does God live there? No. God doesn't live there. And so somehow they are not really understanding that God hasn't necessarily left Israel because the Ark of the Covenant has been taken out. In fact, we just finished Ezekiel. Stop for just a minute. Remember right around chapter 8? What happened in chapter 8 of Ezekiel?
The Shekinah glory left Israel.
Actually does leave, right? Well, that's a long ways. Let's see, if this is 1100 and we're 600, that's 500 years. Bless your heart, I'm sorry.
Little pickle.
500 years after this event of Ichabod is when the Shekinah glory actually leaves. And so has God left Israel in the lurch because the Ark of the Covenant is gone? No. So the whole story revolves around the fact that Israel has misunderstood how God is working amongst them. They have definitely made the Ark of the Covenant an idol. Perhaps it's a really good thing in God's planning that the Ark of the Covenant is taken out of the mix for a while. We see some things that are going to happen to it. Perhaps it's another little piece of the puzzle when we understand that when Nebuchadnezzar comes and takes Jerusalem in our story of Ezekiel, when we read that the Ark of the Covenant disappears. Does God disappear?
No.
From Israel? Does he continue to work with Israel? Of course he does. But the ark is gone and it's no longer there. Remember in the days of Jesus, in the temple of Jesus, the Ark of the Covenant is not there. It's not in the Holy of Holies. When Titus went in there, the history books read he was shocked that it was an empty room, that there was nothing important in the Holy of Holies during that time because the ark was gone. But God continued to work with Israel, but perhaps it was really good a good opportunity for the people to understand that God doesn't live in that box. Because what is he preparing them actually for? That God is going to come in person. That God is going to come during the time of Jesus. They didn't need the Ark of the Covenant anymore for him to dwell between the cherubim, because he was standing in their midst. He was now tabernacling amongst them. And so all of these things are pointing toward that moment so that Israel would see that. But here's another example of where things get all mixed up. And where the ark becomes, if you put God in that box, and that he can only work in that box, then it limits how God works. Are we guilty of that?
Yes.
Yeah.
How are we guilty of limiting God?
Well, by lacking faith that he's in control.
Okay? That he, not understanding he's in control?
And we definitely limit his spirit.
We limit his
Holy
spirit.
We try to do stuff ourselves.
We got a little box we keep it in.
Our comfort zone, right?
Right.
We're comfortable with this, not so much this. Not so,
Unbelief.
unbelief. Okay? So we today limit God in so many ways, thinking that it can only be, he only works, let me think. We see God working the same way we would work, just a little better. He's a little bit smarter, he's a little bit brighter, he's a little bit better, he's a little bit stronger, but he thinks like we do, just better.
We see him through our eyes,
Exactly.
not through his eyes.
Exactly. And so we limit God by taking him from where he lives and bringing him down to where we live. Which is ridiculous when you stop and think about it. Why would you want to have a God who's just like you? Oh, heavenly days. No. we don't need that kind of a God. We want a God whose ways are greater than our ways, whose thoughts are greater than our thoughts, who knows the end from the beginning. All of the things that we know about God, that's the kind of God that you want. You don't want a God like you, and you certainly don't want a God like me. You want something completely different. And Israel is guilty, just like us, of this time of putting it, well, stop and think about it. Look at Phineas and Hophni and the priesthood and what's going on all around them. Look at the time, that 400 years of the judges that had just occurred, and all the stuff that you read about in that book that's been going on in the nation of Israel. They're already weak. They already have a limited view of God. They've already taken him down to their level and become their own gods in their own mind when they do everything that is right in the sight of their own eyes. So this is sort of what you would call an exclamation point moment for Israel when the Ark of the Covenant is missing, because they need to see that that is not where God lives. And so when Phinehas's wife says the glory of the Lord has left, she's saying that he's in exile now. God is in exile in a foreign country. He can no longer work amongst them. He can no longer he can no longer create a ministry there. We know that's not true, because this is the moment when Samuel steps forth. And now God is going to speak to the people again through a prophet. He's going to be much more active. He's going to be much more involved in that. And as we see in the next chapter, chapter 5 is a funny chapter. If you haven't read it yet, take a chance this week. It will make you laugh out loud. God has a great sense of humor in this chapter, and you're going to see it. But he's making a point to the people that these idols, that these graven images, even the Ark of the Covenant, we need to be careful that we don't put our faith in any of those things that limit the Spirit of God. And we're going to see that here coming up. So the glory has not left the nation of Israel, only the Ark of the Covenant. It doesn't leave until Ezekiel. All right, so we'll see next week what happens. The ark is going to go on a 7-month journey. A 7-month journey where we're going to see some various things that happen to it along the way, and some lessons that God is going to teach along the way, and we're going to see that in the next few chapters, and hopefully you're going to get to learn a little bit more about that. Let me just go over our packet. You can turn it off if you want.